The International Criminal Court, the ICC, has issued arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. What is the International Criminal Court? How is it different than the International Court of Justice? What are Netanyahu and Gallant charged with, and what will this mean both for those two individuals and for the war more broadly? I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On November 21, 2024, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In the following summary, I'm going to try to make sense of all this. What is the International Criminal Court? What are the two figures charged with? And what will this mean for the war? First, who is the ICC, the International Criminal Court? The International Criminal Court is one of two international court systems alongside the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. However, both are very different. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, was established in 1949 and is the official judicial arm of the United Nations. That is the system where countries can litigate against each other, and it is meant to try to avoid war. Instead, countries can sue each other in the court. That is the current court where South Africa has filed a lawsuit against Israel on the charge of genocide. The International Criminal Court, in turn, the ICC, was established in 2002, and its focus is on individuals in positions of power within different territories. Unlike the International Court of Justice, the ICC does not have universal jurisdiction, meaning that while the International Court of Justice has automatic jurisdiction over any violation of international law occurring in any country that is a member of the UN, that is not the case for the ICC. First, while focusing on individuals, the ICC only sees cases that relate to four specific crimes. Those are the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. Second, and this is critically important, the ICC's jurisdiction is limited to countries that have signed on the Rome Statute. In other words, while the International Court of Justice has jurisdiction over every country in the world, the International Criminal Court that we're currently focusing on only has jurisdiction in the 124 countries that have agreed to accept this jurisdiction. If a country has joined the ICC, any of the crimes that were listed above that occur within that country can be investigated by the court, and the country is also obligated to comply with the court's decision and help bring people to justice. Now, in terms of the current case, many people have raised the question about the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction, specifically since Israel is not part of the ICC, it is not a signatory on the Rome Statute. What complicates things, however, is that the State of Palestine is in fact a signatory on the statute and has accepted the court's jurisdiction. While Palestine is not a fully accepted UN member, it is a recognized entity within the international authorities. It applied to become part of the ICC in January of 2015, and in March of 2021, the court ruled that it is accepting jurisdiction for the State of Palestine in the areas of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip. In this case, it is similar to how Russia is not a member of the ICC, however Ukraine did accept the court's jurisdiction. Therefore, crimes that are committed in Ukraine can be investigated by the court. As a result, the ICC has issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin for crimes that were committed in Ukraine. In that case, the fact that Israel is not a signatory on the ICC and the Rome Statute does not mean that the ICC has no jurisdiction in the Gaza Strip. The State of Palestine is a signatory, and that's why the ICC has said it can investigate crimes that occur within the State of Palestine, in this case, in the Gaza Strip. So, with this jurisdiction, what are Netanyahu and Gallant being charged with? The ICC investigated the events since October 7th of 2023, including Hamas's October 7th attack and the events that occurred in Gaza since then. On May 20th of 2024, the ICC's chief prosecutor requested arrest warrants be issued against 5 individuals with regards to crimes that have been committed since October 7th. The individuals are Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the then Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders, Ismail Haniyeh, Yahya Sinwar, and Mohammed Def, all of them charged with the crimes that were committed on October 7th and the kidnappings that continued since then that were labeled crimes against humanity. Since the chief prosecutor submitted that request in May, however, Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar have both been killed, making the request for their warrants void. And while the IDF has reported that it had assassinated Mohammed Def, the leader of the Al-Qassam brigades, his death has not been confirmed by Hamas, and his body has never been at least publicly found. Thus, an arrest warrant was also issued for him on November 21st. However, since he is very likely dead, the only relevant warrants that are really being discussed are the other 2 warrants that were issued against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant. The arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant provide a list of crimes that the two are charged with, including a set of war crimes and crimes against humanity that were committed in the Gaza Strip since October 8th of 2023. The main war crime listed is using starvation as a method of war, with the warrant specifying that since October 8th, quote, there are reasonable grounds to believe that both individuals intentionally and knowingly deprive the civilian population of Gaza of objects indispensable for their survival, including food, water, and medicine and medical equipment, as well as fuel and electricity, end quote. The warrant goes on to state that humanitarian assistance being allowed into Gaza since October 8th has often been conditional, and specifies that even when minor increases in humanitarian aid were done, these were done in response to U.S. and international pressure, not in an attempt to fulfill the obligations that Israel has under humanitarian law. The court also explicitly relates the argument that the humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip is a result of warfare and not a deliberate policy of Israel's leaders, and explicitly states, and I quote, the chamber found reasonable grounds to believe that no clear military need or other justification under international humanitarian law could be identified for the restrictions placed on access of humanitarian relief operations, end quote, and goes on to reference statements that were also made by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, connecting the stopping of humanitarian aid and essential goods into Gaza with Israel fulfilling its goals in the war, i.e. saying the deprival of humanitarian aid and food into Gaza was part of a method of war rather than a quote-unquote unforeseen result of ongoing warfare. The court therefore concludes that there is reasonable grounds to believe that the war crime of using starvation as a method of war was ordered by both Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the then Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. With regards to the crimes against humanity, the warrant first cites the same actions that were listed in the war crime section. However, this time it focuses on their intent and outcome, stating, I quote, the lack of food, water, electricity, and fuel, and specific medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of a part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the deaths of civilians, including children, as a result of malnutrition and dehydration, end quote. It then goes on to list actions that fall under the category of, quote, inhumane acts. These include intentionally limiting or preventing medical supplies from entering Gaza, specifically anesthetics and anesthesia machines, stating that as a result of this deliberate policy, the medical establishment in the Gaza Strip could not function properly, and all procedures had to be done without anesthetic, which unto itself would fall under inhumane acts, which is a crime against humanity. Finally, the warrant addresses the crime of persecution as well, stating, and again I quote, there is reasonable grounds to believe that the above-mentioned conduct deprived a significant portion of the civilian population in Gaza of their fundamental rights, including their rights to life and health, and that the population was targeted based on political and or national grounds. It therefore found that the crime against humanity of persecution was committed, end quote. So with these arrest warrants now being issued against Netanyahu and Gallant, what does this mean for both of those individuals and for the war more broadly? The immediate impact on both Netanyahu and Gallant is that if either of them would set foot in one of the 124 countries who are part of the ICC, which includes, I'll say, nearly all of Europe, nearly all of Latin America, Australia, Canada, and many African countries as well, it is a large contingent of the world, that country would be obligated to arrest them and hand them over to the court to stand trial. Some people have suggested that countries may not live up to this. However, historically, most countries have lived up to these requirements. Just as an example, in August of 2023, Russian President Vladimir Putin was scheduled to travel to South Africa for an international BRICS economic meeting. However, South Africa practically, quote-unquote, begged him to not come, explicitly stating that if he does arrive in the country, they will have no choice but to arrest him as a result of the ICC warrant out against him, and Putin, in fact, did not come to South Africa. He cancelled his trip, demonstrating that the threat of arrest may be very real for different leaders if they set foot in these different countries. Beyond that, it is possible that the two may have difficulty traveling even to the United States, even though the U.S. is not signed on the Rome Statute and part of the ICC, since traveling over signatory countries' airspace may become tricky in the event of emergency landings. This will be tricky both for the two individuals as well as for the country to approve this, because once again, if there is an emergency and they have to land there, the country will be in a problem, so to speak, diplomatically. It will be forced to arrest them. More broadly, with regards to the war, there are very likely to be several implications, some of them more immediate, some more long-term. First, it is very likely that different countries are going to fall under heavy internal and international pressure to cancel arms deals with Israel. Now, some may say that this would be offset by Donald Trump taking office in the United States in January. However, it is important to consider that also according to United States law, the United States is responsible to ensure that weaponry it sells to other countries is not used in violation of international humanitarian law. I'm not suggesting that the United States is all of a sudden going to impose a weapons embargo on Israel, but I am suggesting that the entire process of Israeli arms deals may become much more complicated now that one of the most reputable international organizations has issued an arrest warrant for the current country's leader, saying that he may be guilty, while ordering what happens in the war, of war crimes and crimes against humanity. In addition to this, it is also very possible that private international companies and corporations will come under that much more pressure to either sever ties or not develop ties with Israeli companies, which could end up having a grave impact on Israel's economy, which also could end up having implications for the war as well. In addition to that, another implication may be future arrest warrants being issued against other leaders in Israel as well. It's important to note that the ICC can issue secret arrest warrants that only become public when a person arrives in a signatory country, and the court made explicit that these arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant themselves would also have been classified as secret. However, they were made public since the acts in question are still ongoing, and the court wanted to make clear that it's calling for the acts to stop, and that the court is now calling for these people to be arrested. Therefore, beyond Netanyahu and Gallant, we are likely to see a very sharp decline in international travel of Israeli leaders, which could have impact on international deals and international relations between countries as well. Again, that remains to be seen. Finally, it is possible that the ICC's issuing of arrest warrants for Israel's leadership will blow significant winds in the sails of South Africa's case in the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. The ICC investigates leaders and peoples in positions of authority, and if the ICC is stating that there is sufficient evidence to issue arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity against Israel's leadership, this will likely have an important impact on South Africa's claim that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. This could have significant implications since, unlike the ICC, the International Court of Justice has vastly more authority and sort of more teeth behind its different statements. It also could issue immediate injunctions against Israel with regards to how the war is conducted. Again, it's important to note that the two courts are separate, and evidence for one does not necessarily amount to evidence for the other. Furthermore, the ICC made clear that based on the evidence that was submitted by May 20th, the court could not substantiate the crime of extermination against Netanyahu and Gallant. So South Africa is claiming that there is a crime of genocide happening. The court said, based on the evidence until May 20th, it cannot substantiate the crime of extermination. Despite this, it is very likely that South Africa's case will be substantially strengthened by the ICC's decision, which may have vast implications for the war's trajectory as it develops. That is my brief summary on the International Criminal Court's decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. If you find these summaries informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when they come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.